Last week we learned some of the background information about the whole issue of artificial insemination, and I mentioned to you that this was, there have been real-life cases of this, even in our own community, where I was confronted by a member of our kehillah not too long ago, and the guy told me that his mother had shared with him, after he already had kids and was a grandfather, that his mother had trouble conceiving back in the 60s. And his mother went to the doctor, and he injected her with some semen from a sperm bank, told her to go home and spend time with her husband, and then this guy was born. And the joke of the family is he doesn't look like anyone else in the family. And so this is the issue. Now, we saw last week that there's a source in the Medrash about a man whose name was Ben Sira, the son of Yirmiyahu Hanavi and the grandson of Yirmiyahu Hanavi. How could someone be the son and the grandson at the same time? So we saw that the Medrash told us that Yirmiyahu Hanavi was forced to ejaculate in a bathtub through these ruffians, and then his daughter later took a bath in that same bathhouse. She was impregnated, and the child that was born was Ben Sira. And the Medrash relates how Ben Sira was a remarkably brilliant child already from the womb. Just as the moment he was born, he was able to speak, and he uttered words of great wisdom. So there was something remarkable about this child. But it's clear from the context of the Medrash that he's considered to be a Vlad Kasher. He's an exceptional Vlad. He's an exceptional offspring. Certainly not a Mamzer. And this is what Rabbeinu Peretz and other Rishonim used as a support to say that a child that is born through artificial insemination, that is, not through an act of intercourse between a man and a woman, but the insertion of sperm into a woman's womb, not through conventional means, does not produce a mamzer, even if the woman is a married woman at the time. And so the last thing that we saw was the tshuva in Igros Moshe, Even HaEzer Chelek Aleph Siman Yud, which is in source number 7 on page 2. That's the last thing that we saw last time. And we mentioned that we were going to see two other tshuvas from Rav Moshe. The second tshuva from Rav Moshe is in number 8. And basically the first tshuva that we saw is a real-life case that was brought to Rav Moshe's attention, where a man and a woman were married. The doctors were able to ascertain that after many years of infertility, the doctor said it's the husband's fault. In other words, he's got a low sperm count. As a guy once told me who was having difficulty, he says, "Rabbi, I'm shooting blanks." Right? So he was shooting blanks, and he wasn't able to get his wife pregnant, unfortunately. And so she went to the doctor unbeknownst to her husband. And the doctor did this procedure. This was being done already, I'm not sure if it was the 50s or the 60s when they started it, but this was being done from sperm donors. The doctor told her to go home, spend time with your husband, with the possibility that perhaps he would feel that he was the father, that he parented the child. And now the husband discovers what the wife has done, and he doesn't want to be with her. He thinks she's a mina efes, she's an adulteress for having become pregnant from another man's sperm, and Rav Moshe has to allay all of those concerns. And so in the first tshuva he says, number 1, she did not commit niyuv, she did not commit adultery, because there was no intercourse. Number 2, the child that will be born is not a mamzer, but the child is a kosher of vlad. And number 3, you may safely assume that the sperm that was donated is from a Gentile, and therefore there's no yuchsin whatsoever that follows a Gentile, and for all intents and purposes this child has no father, has only a mother, and therefore you should raise the child well. The only thing that we saw at the very end of the tshuva was the financial issue that Rav Moshe observes. He says, because this woman went without her husband's permission, without her husband's consent, she can't force the husband to pay for this kid's anything. In other words, the husband can say, I'm not paying for those diapers. Certainly not paying for that kid's day school tuition. You never asked me rishus. So that's the one thing that Rav Moshe concedes, is that from a Choshen Mishpat standpoint, since he never consented to this, he can't be obligated to pay. Okay? So now let's take a look at number 8, which was written around the same time as the first tshuva, and it's bedin, and I've tried to condense it as best as I can to avoid repetition. Bedin zrika zera lemei haisha shechidshu harofim, Rosh Chodesh Nisan Tafshin Yud Tes. This is considered to be a relatively new procedure. Tafshin Yud Tes is at 1959. It's 59, right? If it's, yeah, okay. V'din zera acher mefurash le'isser betaz yoredei simin kuf tzadi hesif katan zayin shehevi mishum harav peretz b'hago asmak sheisha tzricha lizor melishko v'asadinim sheshachav aleihen ish acher. So there is something that's brought down by the Taz, that's quoted from one of the Balei HaTosfos, Rabbeinu Peretz, that we saw last week, and that is that there's nothing wrong with a woman sleeping on her husband's dirty bed sheets, and because the worst that'll happen is that if she sleeps on dirty bed sheets where the husband ejaculated, what's the worst that could happen is that she'll become pregnant from her own husband, and there's nothing wrong with that. See, the Gemara makes an assumption that it's possible that residual semen could actually impregnate a woman just by sleeping on the bed sheets. That's the assumption that the Gemara. I don't know whether that's within the realm of possibility today, but the Gemara makes that assumption, or the Balei HaTosfos make the assumption that that's possible. Now, the only thing that you would have to be concerned about is what if at the time when she sleeps on the bed sheets she's a nida? Do you have to worry about the stigma of a conception at a time when a woman is nida, where the Gemara says that the child may be in some way pagum, the child may in some way be tainted. So there they say that there's nothing wrong with that, because the child is only pagum is if it's a product of actual bia. But then the Balei Tosfos say that a woman may not sleep on the bed sheets of another man whose bed sheets are dirty, because she might become pregnant from that other man's semen. Harei chazinan sha'asu li'isha lihisaber mizera shel acher afilu shelo bevia shehavlad kasher. What we see from this is that even when as we've established, that the child is not stigmatized if the father is someone other than the man that she's married to. The child is not a mamzer, but still, lechatchila, a woman should not allow herself to be inseminated by anyone other than her husband, even through artificial insemination, because lechatchila, she's not allowed to sleep on another man's dirty bed sheets. Aval mikiven shahatam mefurasham shehu midin gezera shemayisa achos me'aviv v'chenu b'vei shvul simin aleph sifkat and yud. He says, but what's the reason why artificial insemination lechatchila is usher from another man? So it's clear from the Rabbeinu Peretz that is being cited that the reason is because maybe the man who was the donor, the guy that's not her husband who was the donor, maybe he'll have other children. So let's say his semen impregnated this woman who slept on the bed sheets, and she gives birth to a boy. This man may have impregnated his own wife, and his wife gave birth to a girl. And maybe the boy and girl will meet at some singles event, at Schmingles, right? And they'll think that they're attracted to each other, not realizing that they're half-brothers and sisters, which is an erva. So that's the reason why lechatchila, a woman should not seek and should not allow herself to be artificially inseminated, not because of a problem of niyuf, not of adultery, not because of a problem of mamzerus, but rather out of a concern that the offspring will marry someone that he's actually related to without his knowledge. Okay? But
Here we don't, we have machlokes whether the choshen is limiyad or not. So here we don't, even though it's such a far-fetched possibility, we're still choshesh.
So apparently, the chachamim here are choshesh for such a miyut that even though you could now, this is only lechatchila, right? What happens if b'di'eved he goes ahead and he gets married after having his mother being artificially inseminated? Do we, or let me put it even better. No. Let's say are we going to tell a guy who was born through artificial insemination that he may not get married lest he may marry his half-sister unbeknownst to him? No, we don't say that. Because we can always say you hold the parish meruba kaparish, right? Or whatever svara we're going to argue that you can go after rov. But lechatchila, as a safeguard, don't allow this situation to ever come up where you have to go after the rov. But he says, this is Rav Moshe's big chiddush. He says, yesh lahater bezera shel nachri shekeven shahavlad yihye Yisrael keven sheimo Yisraelis ein lachosh leklum de'ein lo yichus lahaav hanachri af im haya derech bia v'kol sheken kishein derech bia ela me ambati. So Rav Moshe says like this. He says, in a situation where the semen donor is a Gentile, so then there's nothing to worry about. Because so what? Let's say this guy's semen gets another woman pregnant and she has a girl. But there's no pedigree that follows a Gentile father. So therefore, even if genetically they were related, there's no halachic relationship whatsoever. And that's true even if the Gentile impregnated her through bia, and certainly that's true if he impregnated her through this artificial method. V'im yesh safek shema gambala yisrape besoch gimel chadashim lizrik hazera shel hanachri b'me'aha tifrosh mi bala gimel chadashim. Now, here's another issue that Rav Moshe raises, which we're going to see the Satmar Rav raise this objection. And that is, what about the fact that, like that song goes, "Mama's baby, daddy's maybe." In other words, we're not ghetto people, and so in a situation where the Chazal say that the Gemara says that Hakadosh Baruch Hu Shechina is not shoret, does not rest upon people of doubtful pedigree. In other words, if in order for the Shechina to rest upon the Jewish people, everyone's supposed to know who their mother and father is. And that's the reason why Chazal made a requirement that if a woman becomes an almana, she has to wait 3 months before getting remarried, because in the event that she discovers that she's pregnant shortly after her second marriage, you don't want to get into a position of who's the daddy. Was my first husband the daddy? Was my second husband the daddy? So you might say, well, what difference does it make? If they were both Yisraels, what difference? Halachically, the child's Jewish anyway, right? But that's the problem. Hashem tells us that I want my Shechina to rest on a people who know exactly who the father is and exactly who the mother is. So to address that concern, so here's the issue. So Rav Moshe says, look, what about the case where the doctor says, here, I've just shtuped you with some sperm, now go home to your husband and have a good time. Why did the doctors do that? Because they wanted the husbands to feel that there's at least a chance that they are the father. So Rav Moshe says, I hear your objection, because now you're creating a situation where you don't know who the real father is. So if you're concerned that there's a real possibility that one of the father's sperm may actually have the potency to impregnate her, then after she has this procedure done of artificial insemination, have them separate for 3 months to make sure that the pregnancy will be traceable back to the Gentile donor and not possibly to her actual husband. If that's your concern, simple solution. Just don't have relations for 3 months, and then you can resume normal activity once it's verified that she's pregnant. By the way, I should point out just as a sidebar, this whole issue of Yemei Havchana, there are many poskim, if I'm not mistaken, memory tells me that Rav Moshe himself poskin this way, that if a woman can verify that she's pregnant then you don't have to wait the full 3 months. In other words, like the 3 months was before they had early pregnancy tests, the EPTs, right? But now that we have pregnancy tests, a home pregnancy test, right? So if a woman, let's say, gets divorced or becomes an almana, and she wants to remarry, it can happen. Like a woman was an aguna for 5 years, and in the meantime she met this fantastic guy, and finally she gets her get, and now she wants to be able to. Well, that's not a really good example, because then you know that she's not pregnant. So there are instances where the poskim will allow a woman to get to, if she can verify that she is pregnant, then she wouldn't have to wait the remaining 3 months, right? So that's just as a sidebar. But anyway, so let's just see. Rav Moshe continues and he says, "V'im ha'orofim omdim shelo efshir sheyisrape b'soch gimel chadashim lo titztarech lifrosh mibala ki lo plug leka bazet u'milsa de lo shchicha ve'enu b'chlal l'gzeret derech b'ya." And Rav Moshe further says, if the doctors say, listen, we're very sorry, Mrs. Bernstein, but your husband is simply sterile. He's not able to impregnate you. We've done the sperm count, and we know there's nothing there. So in that situation where the doctors tell you bivados, then even separating for 3 months is not necessary. Then if she goes for the artificial insemination, then there's not even a suffix. You're not creating that matzav of suffix, because the doctors have said definitively your husband is not capable of reproduction. The gam yoel, masha hazera yihya mishal nachri, afla hafsovrim dimizera acher hu mamzer gam belobia. Now Rav Moshe takes into account the fact that there was this very big objection to his psak, coming from Rav Breish, the Satmar Rav, some other poskim, and they cited this shita of the Bar Levoy, who I mentioned to you was my great-great-grandfather or great-great-great-grandfather, I'm not sure, the Rav Horowitz Mistanislav. And he said that if a woman is artificially inseminated while she's an Eishes Ish, the child is a mamzer. So he says, but that's only true if the zera was from a yid. If the zera is from a goy, he says, then even Bar Levoy would be makel and say that the child is not a mamzer. He says, Ein ba'otzer haposkim sifkat and membei shehevi kein b'shem sefer Bar Levoy av shepashat she'en shitaso klum neged harabenu peretz. But we have to say, look, Bar Levoy is from the late 19th century, early 20th century. His shita is null and void when it comes to the shita of the Rabbeinu Peretz, who's one of the Balei HaTosfos. So if you're going to choose whether you paskin l'chumra like Bar Levoy, or you paskin l'kula like one of the Balei HaTosfos, there's no contest. V'sovrin ken gam habach v'hataz v'hachelkas mechokek v'habei Shmuel. And look at all of these other early achronim who paskin like Rabbeinu Peretz. Avol shel nachri af l'shitaso harei af mibias nachri halacha she'en havlad mamzer. But he says, but remember we learned this in the Shulchan Aruch. If a woman if a woman has relations with a nachri, with a goy, even though she's an Eishes Ish, the child is not a mamzer. So therefore, there's mamish nothing to worry about when the sperm donor is a Gentile. V'lachein yesh lahater b'shas hadechak gadol u'mitzta'arim ma'od b'hishtokekam livlad. Listen to Rav Moshe's language, because here I notice that the language that Rav Moshe uses in these tshuvas is especially important. He says, b'shas hadechak gadol, in a time of great pressing need, says Rav Moshe. And what does he define great pressing need? That the parents, the couple, are in great distress because they want to have children. And lizrok lehaisha b'me'eha zera shel nachri davka. So then we can permit even lechatchila, says Rav Moshe, that a woman could go for artificial insemination treatment. Umistavir sha'af stam zera yesh litlo shuhu shel nachrim kirov elu shemotziin zarm lazehem nachrim. And let's say they don't tell you who the donor is. You go to a clinic in New York City, and you get the donation. So here Rav Moshe says, because he's in New York, right? I don't think that this would apply if you had this done in Eretz Yisrael, but at least in Golus, and certainly outside of New York City even more so, you can certainly be hoylech achar harov to say that the assumption is that the donor was a Gentile. Levad ma behamedina him rov akum hare biyichud v'hotzah zera shu dvar iser hare ein lahachshiv chelek gadol mi Yisrael me'osin zeh ela rak elu she'enam shomrei Torah shelachein hu mi'uta demi'uta mi Yisrael. So listen to what he says. He says, listen, number one, the majority of the population is Gentile, even in New York City, right? Where they say at one time there was a third of the population was Jewish in New York City. I don't even think that's accurate anymore. It's probably less by now. But he says, but still the rove is Gentile. And not only that, but he says, even if it were from a Jew, I mean, why would you argue it's from a Jew? Most people who donate to the sperm clinics, what Jew is going to be motzi zera levatala? Is going to do this activity?
Gynecologist.
Oh right, there's a famous story about a gynecologist who did it.
72 pregnancies.
Yeah. So right, what kind of yid is going to do this? So therefore, the only kind of yid who's going to do this is a non-frum yid. So that's already a segment of the Jewish population who's only a small percentage of the general population. So therefore, he calls it a miyuta de miyuta, a percentage of a percentage, or a minority of a minority, and like only a minority of Jews would do this in the first place, and Jews are only a minority within the general population. I'm not sure whether you can argue that anymore, as far as whether Jews would do this or not, and therefore v'yesh lamezel basar ruba shehem nachrim v'im efshel hivada bebarur shehu shal nachrim tov lishal al zeh. And Rav Moshe concludes by saying the best eitzah would be is to tell the doctor you dafka want a Gentile donor. I want a tall Scandinavian-looking child, right? So you tell the doctor I want a tall, blonde Scandinavian, Aryan-looking child. So give me a Gentile. I don't want a Jewish-looking child, right? Rav Moshe in the previous tshuva had said a huge chiddush. If you recall from last week, those of you who were here. He said that even if the doctor tells you that it's a Jewish donor, you don't have to believe the doctor. Because the doctor is probably telling you to put your mind at ease because he knows that you want to have a Jewish donor. So Rav Moshe says, but the best thing is to dafka tell the doctor, no, I need to know that it's a Gentile. Okay, that's at least lechatchila. Yeah, Alan.
It's maybe a little premature, but what happens if we're talking about a shitza, basically, who's impregnated by a Jew, and then she converts? Is that completely lost in the equation because she's not associated for that purposes after she converts?
So I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, she became pregnant, whether through artificial insemination or through actual.
Yeah. So let's say she was married to a Jewish guy. Yeah.
Right.
So she becomes pregnant. The child, we paskin that it's a suffix if horasa was shalo bikdusha and leidasa was bikdusha, and we require that l'chumra that the child needs a gerus, because it's a machlokas as to whether in that situation the child is Jewish or not.
Right. So she converts afterwards.
She converts after the child is born.
Yeah.
So the child will convert also separately.
But is the child allowed to marry another Jew?
Why wouldn't the child be allowed to marry another Jew?
Well, because his father was Jewish.
So what?
It may be related.
No. So remember, this is only a concern that you shouldn't get artificially inseminated, lechatchila, out of a concern. But once she is artificially inseminated, we're never going to bar that offspring from getting married.
Even if the father is Jewish.
Even if the father is Jewish. Yes, absolutely. Okay. And now we're going to see the third tshuva, the third and final tshuva from Rav Moshe, which was written a couple of years later. And the pertinent information, I've tried to condense it as much as I can, even though it's a little bit hard to condense, but I've tried to shrink it down. In order to follow the logic of Rav Moshe from the pasuk that he quotes, let's take a look at the pasuk in Vayikra, Perak Yud Ches, pasuk Chaf. The Torah says, "Ve'el eshes amisecha lo sitein shechavtecha lizora letamava." That you may. This pasuk is prohibiting adultery. Okay, you may not place your seed in a married woman, the woman of a woman who's married to your fellow, to defile her. And there's an extraneous word, lo sitein shechavtecha lizora. Lizora means for seed. So there's many different ways that this pasuk could be interpreted, both for good and for bad. So the Ibn Ezra points out in source number 10, he says, Va'asher gavra taivas yitzram al das libam to beferish lizara. So he says, the Ibn Ezra says that there are many people who have a taiva for sex. And therefore they try to look at the words in the pasuk to try and find some kind of heter to be swingers, right? And so that's a terrible thing, says the Ibn Ezra. So what do people do? They say, what does the Torah prohibit? The Torah only prohibits adultery if there's the possibility of her conceiving, because it says it's only when you place your seed in her. Well, what if I have a great time with a woman, but I don't put my seed? I don't make a deposit, as it were. So then maybe the Torah does not prohibit it, right? So that's what the Ibn Ezra comes to dispel. He says, V'yadanu ki hamishagel nechlak legimel chalakim. We know that the reason why people have sexual relations is for one of three reasons. Ha'echa lepriya uravia below taiva. One is for reproductive purposes, not because they have any particular sexual urge, but rather because they want to have a child. Hasheni lahakel meleus haguf. The second reason is because they need to alleviate the pressure they feel in their body. That's the second reason. And the third reason is v'hashlishi l'taiva hanimshal v'les l'taiva sabehema. The third reason is because of sexual desire, right, which is animalistic. Okay? So those are three reasons. The first two are more, I guess, virtuous in a sense. The first one is the most virtuous because I'm doing it because I want to have children. The second one is my body is in pain because I'm engorged. And the third reason has to do with taiva. Ve'achar she'omar hakasav lizara shetamu afilu lizara hinehi asura iser chama. And that's why the Torah says lizara. According to Ibn Ezra, the reason why the Torah says lizara is that regardless of your motivation for wanting to have relations with a woman that is forbidden to you, even if it is for the most virtuous of reasons, that you're only doing it for reproductive purposes. Let's say I know my friend's wife has been barren for so many years, and there's like movies like this, and I want to be virtuous, and I've agreed. My best friend Chuck asked me if I would impregnate his wife so that they could have children. So that too is the Torah is saying that you're not allowed to do, even if it's lizara, even if it's to help them have children, that too is prohibited. And from that you understand that no matter how virtuous the motivation might be, there is never a circumstance where you could justify adultery. That's why the Torah says lizara. Comes along the Ramban, and the Ramban first quotes the Ibn Ezra, and he says, "Ve'efshir shamar lizara lahazkir tam ha'isr, ki lo yivoda hazera lemihu, v'yavo mizeh to'avos gedolos v'ros lishnehem." So it could be, says the Ramban, that the word lizara in the pasuk is merely telling you why Hashem says that this is a terrible thing. That if we allow wife swapping, indiscriminately outside of the confines of marriage, then no one's going to know whose baby it is. And that's what's going to ensue, is terrible, terrible things will ensue. So the word lizara is because God wants to preserve the pure pedigree within the Jewish families, and that's the reason why adultery is prohibited. V'hanachon be'enai. And then after discussing that, he says, but the real reason I think, says the Ramban, is ki ba'avur heyos eshes amiso asur lo legamre lo yinoke kol hanogea ba hutzrach lomer lizara. He says, here's what I think. We all know what a terrible crime adultery is. even to the point where it's not even okay to touch another man's wife. Forget about the actual act of adultery, but you're not even allowed to touch another man's wife. And I might have thought that when the Torah prohibits adultery, it prohibits everything, and you get kares for this, even if you just touch your friend's wife. She'im omar lo sitein shechavtecha bilvad hayanira sheyazhir afilo hashoichev ima lechabek ulenashek v'kan b'chayve krisis yazhir. Al kein hutzrach lahazkir shchiva lezera lefaresh ki b'mishagel yazhir. So the Ramban says is that maybe if the Torah would have just said lo sitein shechavtecha without the word lezara, I might have thought that the Torah is saying you cannot snuggle with another man's wife. And if you do, you get kares. Now, snuggling with another man's wife is, I don't want anyone to say the rabbi said it's okay, right? That's not what the Ramban is saying. That's not what I'm saying. You're not allowed to, even affectionately, if you see them in the lobby in shul, you can't go over to another guy's wife and give her a peck on the cheek. I don't know why some people do it, but they do it. But halachically, it's not okay. But the question is, do you get kares for it? And the answer is no, you don't get kares for it. And that's why the Torah says lezara. The Torah says lezara to tell you that when do you get kares? When you actually consummate a sexual act. That's when you get kares. Al kain hutzrach lahazkir shchiva lezera lefarish kibim mishagel yasir. V'hu atam b'shivcha charufa, etc., etc., etc. Okay, that's the idea. Now, you have all the requisite information now to follow the tshuva in the Ramban, in Rav Moshe. So let's take a look at the Rav Moshe's tshuva. This is now from 1962, right? We went from 1959 to 1962, 3 years later, and he writes, and this is from Rav Moshe Chaim Ephraim Bloch, and just to point out that many of the arguments that you're going to see that Rav Moshe is responding to are really Rav Bloch presenting the Satmar Rav's arguments against Rav Moshe. Because by the time Rav Moshe wrote this tshuva, the Satmar Rav in Divrei Yoel had written a scathing attack against Rav Moshe's heter for artificial insemination, in which he said that the child is a mamzer, etc., etc., etc. And so there were many people who were very, righteously indignant that Rav Moshe would be so liberal in his halachic ruling. And that's why this opening paragraph is so powerful. I thought it's worthwhile reading the language inside. Hine kibalti michtavo ha'aroch me'od hamalei divrei tochacha al kol gidosav. I have received your very long letter that is filled with words of rebuke. Al kol gidosav, overflowing, right? Overflowing with rebuke. Al ma shelefi da'ato nidmelo sheteshuvasi simin yod v'simin ayin aleph misifri igros Moshe al even ha'ezer yigremu eze pirtza b'taharas ukdushas yichus klal Yisrael. Your righteous indignation is based on your concern that my permissibility, my permissive ruling, that a woman may get artificially inseminated will cause a great breach in the purity and the holiness of the pedigree of the Jewish people. Right? That is your concern. Now, v'nikar mimichtav kvod Toraso shahaya savur sheyia likepeda al divrei hatochacha shelo. It became clear from the language in your letter that I would be offended, that I might be offended by your words of rebuke to me. Listen to what he writes. Va'ani adarabba, ani nirgash mizeh, sha'ani ro'eh shenimtzaim anashim ba'alei ruach she'inam yireim v'lo mitbayishim milomar tochacha. You see, this is the great godless and the humility of a Rav Moshe. He says, I'm not offended that you want to give me rebuke. I am impressed. I am deeply impressed that there are still people within Klal Yisrael who are so filled with conviction and so concerned about upholding the Torah that they feel that it is and they're not afraid and they're not embarrassed to express their disdain when they see something wrong taking place. And so you get a big yishar koach, says Rav Moshe, for ranking me out in your letter. Yeah. Aval ha'emes she'ein bidvarim shekasavdi v'shehoresi shum davar sheyigrom chas v'sholom eze chilul b'taras u'kedushas Yisrael. Elatoras emes midiver Rabboseinu harisham. So now let's get to tachlis. Now that I've dispelled your concern that maybe you'd offend me, not at all. But let me tell you the reality is, my friend. The reality is that nothing that I wrote to permit this act would in any way compromise the great tahara and the kedusha within Klal Yisrael, but rather what I've written is based on the true Torah from our forebears. The ha'irur shel kvod toraso al zeh ba me hashkafo sheboy miyedias deos chitzonios. Now listen to his the language is just so powerful. He says, your whole complaint that you've lodged against me is coming from an attitude which has been placed within you from foreign sources. Now remember, this is a guy who's complaining to Rav Moshe based on the arguments of the Satmar Rav that you are corrupting the Kedusha and the Tahara of Klal Yisrael with great zealotry, yes? Rav Moshe says, that's not Torah. You're coming from with foreign ideas from foreign sources, which, maybe just because you think you're being more machmir, you may think that you're more authentic in your Torah view, but that's not Torah, my friend. Those complaints are coming from somewhere else. Shemibli meisim mashbi'im af al gdoilim b'chachma lahavin mitzvos Hashem yisparach b'torasenu hakadoisha lefi osan hadeos hanichzavos asher mishapchim chas v'shalom ha'asr l'muter v'hamuter la'asr uchimegala panim b'torah shelo kahalachahu. Such powerful words. He says that without even your realizing it, without even their realizing it, even great Gedolei Yisrael have had their opinions corrupted by foreign ideas and ideologies creeping into their interpretation of Torah, to the point where that which they should paskin is mutter, they paskin is asur, and that which they should paskin is asur, they paskin to be mutter. It's because sometimes foreign ideologies creep into our minds, and sometimes those foreign ideologies tell us to be more machmir, sometimes they tell us to be more mekel. But in this case, your foreign ideology compels you to be more machmir, but that's not Torah. And where you should be being paskening mutter, you're paskening asr, and that's just as bad as paskening mutter when it should be asr. Sheyesh bazek peda gedoyla af bidvarim shehu lahachmir, ki yadua mehadvarim shatzdu kemachmirim sha'asu kama takanos lahotzi miliban. He says, and listen, he says, Chazal have faced this all in the past. That there were always people who felt that to take the more machmir position was the Torah position, and Chazal themselves had to combat the people who were overly machmir. They were called Sedukim. And Chazal took actual historical measures. Like that famous halacha about the para aduma, that they would dafka make the guy who prepared the para aduma, they would dafka expose him to a sheretz, to make him tameh and make him a tvul yom instead of being totally tohar. Because they dafka wanted to show that it's okay for a tvul yom to prepare the ashes of the para aduma. Like, there are other examples of this, but where Chazal are deliberately, they create a policy of kula to show that we're not like the tzedukim, who are overly machmir. Okay? Va'ani baruch Hashem, she'eni lo mehem v'lo mehamonam, v'chol hashkafasi hu rak miyediat haTorah b'lishum ta'arovot miyediot chitzoniot. Baruch Hashem, says Rav Moshe, I can confidently say I'm not part of those people with foreign ideologies. My whole hashkafa is through knowledge of Torah. And by the way, you know how he can testify about that? Because Rav Moshe never spent a day in yeshiva. He learned, I don't know if he never spent a day in yeshiva, but he didn't, most of his career was not in yeshiva, was studying with his father on the dining room table in in their small town of Luban, right? And I haven't had the ability to have been corrupted by different ideologies that come into different communal structures, because I was learning Torah in a vacuum. And I was never contaminated by some of these ideologies.
What do you think he's referring to when he says foreign influences? Is that Hasidus?
It could be Hasidus, right? It could be puritanical attitudes that were adopted in certain communities in different parts of Europe. I don't want to conjecture too much, because I feel that the fact that Rav Moshe himself concealed it and didn't say what those foreign ideologies were means that he wasn't interested in pointing the finger, right? He just wanted to say in a very vague way that Baruch Hashem, my ideas have not been corrupted like others have, right? Shemishpateha emes bein shehu lahachmir bein shehu lahakil. And therefore, when you follow the Torah, the rules of the Torah are clear and correct, whether you end up being machmir or whether you end up being mekel. Ve'ein hata'amim mehashkafos chitzonios usvaros beduyos mehalev klum af im lahachmir uledimyon shehu liyoter tahara kedusha. He says, and therefore, just because a person ends up being more machmir because of these foreign ideologies, they're nothingness. Even if you feel that you're adding to the kedusha and the tahara of Klal Yisrael, that doesn't mean you're right. You know, today we could point to certain things in our own society where people who are coming from the right side to be machmir, and they would say, what are you doing? What are you, crazy? Where does this come from? Like this whole thing, you got to blur a woman's face, or you can't have women's faces in Jewish magazines, right? Where does this come from? This kind of ideology that never existed 30 years ago, right? So you want to say, well, it's for the kedusha and the tahara of Klal Yisrael. That's all well and good, but this is something you just made up. Where does this made up stuff come from? That's not Torah, says Rav Moshe. You got to have the Masorah for it, right? And it leads. And by the way, it's a chumrah hamevi lidei kula. Ve'atana daber me'etzem halacha lema'or toraseinu hakdosha. Now let's try to illuminate the issue. Now that I've dispelled, I've given you this very, very important introduction to my hashkafa, and to why, I'm not intimidated, I'm not offended. I applaud you for your tochacha, but realize that it's not coming from a healthy place, says Rav Moshe, and that's his tochacha back to the person, right? Now let's talk about the issue at hand. We'll see how much time we have. He says, Hu etzem hadin hu davar baru, hine etzem hadin hu davar baru pashat she'isuri arayos hein b'maisa habia ve'ein mishum hazera she'yivold ve'eino mishum hazera she'yivoldu mazeh. It's clear, very, very clear. It's quite clear as day, says Rav Moshe, that a child's the act of erva is only through bia. The prohibition of erva is only through bia, and there's no taint to any child that is born outside the context of bia when it's done with an erva. Dilachein ein shum chiluk behayisurim bein ruuya laholid bein ein ruuya laholid ka'akeres ka'akara va'ailanis. He says, and to wit, he says, that's why when the Torah prohibits forbidden relationships, it's completely irrelevant whether the woman that I'm proposing to have relations with is fertile or infertile. Even if she's infertile, if she's forbidden to me, she's forbidden to me. It's got nothing to do with her productive abilities, her reproductive abilities. And another raya to that is the Torah prohibits bia shelo kedarka, which is anal intercourse, and that surely a woman can't become pregnant from, and yet the Torah prohibits it. So it's got nothing to do, the prohibition of intercourse to an erva has nothing to do with the ability for a woman to be impregnated thereby. Va'af be'isr eishes ish nemar bikrolo sitein shechavtecha lazara shehu makom l'rishayim lito she'isr hurak mishum sheteled mizeh k'dei Ibn Ezra b'pirusho. He says, and now he quotes the Ibn Ezra that we saw before. He says, even adultery, where the Torah adds the word lazara, and the Ibn Ezra says that many bad people have tried to use that as an argument, that the only time it's prohibited to adultery is if it could conceivably result in impregnation. Shekasav asher govra taivas yitzam al das libam toba pirush lezera ayin sham. And the Ibn Ezra says that that's totally erroneous. Utos gomer sheton rishon bekavana lahatir isra eshes ish hachomer ma'od kisheina ru'uya lezera. He says, and that's a total fallacy, he says. Just because a woman is not capable of conception means that there's no longer an isser. The thing that the Torah prohibits with arayas is the bia. Anything other than the bia itself, regardless of the reproductive possibilities of that act, if it's not bia, it's not usr. Ki hadinu shelo shaykh klal ha'isr le'inyan holada mizeh elo shu isr al habia b'chol oifen shu af ba'akara va'ailanis va'af b'shelo kedarka. He just repeats what he said before. Ulezora shenemar b'kra hu ledrasha lemait mishamesh be'aver meis lemandor mishamesh meis ba'arayas potter ulemandor merchayv hu lemait mishamesh meis kimefurish b'yavavas daf nun hey ayin sham. He says, why does the Torah use the word lezara? So he says, well, the Gemara takes that. It's different from the Ibn Ezra, different from the Ramban. He says, it's to tell me that it's to exclude a person who is working with a flaccid organ. That's, the Torah says, your organ has to be capable of ejaculation, and if not, there's no isser. And according to another opinion, it's to preclude a person who commits, what is that called? When you have sex with a corpse, what is that called? Necrophilia, right? It's when it's to lemait mishamesh mesa, right? Necrophilia. That's what it's coming to exclude. Uma shenasa havlad mamzer hu mikra achrina mishum shehi erva dechayvi krisus v'chayvi misas beis and krisus b'daf memtes. But what's clear, says Rav Moshe, as far as the pedigree of the child, there's no possibility of mamzerus. Is only based on the imkein lo shach klal lomar shebishvel azer sheteled hu ha'isser. It's got nothing to do with the fact that the seed came from a foreign donor. It's got to do with the fact that the union that caused the conception is a union that has a penalty of death or kares. But if the union was done artificially, the conception was done artificially, there's no kares, there's no death penalty, so there can't be any mamzerus. V'lachein borer, we're just skipping some lines that are in the tshuva. V'lachein borer she'af ma shekosav haramban b'pirusho sham ve'efshur she'amar lezara lahazkir tam be'isser ki lo yivada hazer lemihu. So what are you going to do with the Ramban's teretz? The Ramban had said that maybe the reason why the Torah wrote Lezara in the Pasuk is to tell you why God says this is such a bad thing. Because if we allow wife swapping, we're never going to know who the real father of these children is. But he says, Chas v'sholem sheyal al daito shezo tam ha'emes v'liten yad leposhim harisham shizkar ibn Ezra. He says, if you're going to take that literally, that that's the only reason why the Torah forbids adultery, then you could use this as a kula to say, well, as long as we don't get pregnant, as long as she's not capable, as long as she's on contraceptives, as long as I use, some kind of prophylactic, so then there's no prohibition of adultery. That's not what the Ramban means. And furthermore, that can't possibly be the reason why the Torah prohibits adultery, because the whole din of knowing who the father and the mother is only a rabbinic law. It's got nothing to do with the Torah's prohibition of adultery. The Ramban was simply just adding an added feature as to why the Torah prohibits adultery, but that's not the main reason. Umikiven, and we turn to page 4, Umikiven sha'isr hu al ma'aseh habia lo shayach ha'isr al zrikas zera leguf ha'isha shelo bevia lo ba'arayis the kurva lo be'erva de'ishes ish. He says, and therefore it's quite clear that artificial insemination, even if it's into a married woman, even if she's another type of erva, does not produce a mamzer. There's no isser bia, there's no isser kares, there's no isser misa. Umimelo leka mamzera shurak mitzad ma'isa habia shurak bazen yemar bikrab isser eshes av. V'chein pashat shelo nesra l'bayla kivin shelo haya ma'isa bia af im lo haya nizkar zeh. And therefore, clearly, she is not forbidden to her husband at all. she's allowed to, it's not considered niyuf, it's not considered adultery, the child's not a mamzer, etc., etc., etc.
So in all three shuvas, and this one also, he's repeating himself over and over, he's making the point, but is he addressing the question of the Satmar Rav? Like
Which is?
He's just, well, we haven't seen it, but he's just saying, I disagree, and he repeats his opinion 3 times.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
he doesn't sort of
So
bring
one of
down
the,
that opinion. He says that we won't discuss it because of other reasons, but
right.
you don't see him
Well,
addressing
there are a couple of objections of the Satmar Rav. One objection is this Bar Levoy Shita,
Okay, so
and Rav Moshe said, I understand that it's not accepted l'kuli alma. You'll always find one in the crowd who's machmir,
right.
right? So that's one, and that's he's going to say in the next paragraph. And by the way, he actually was chastised by the person in the tshuva because he said v'hu hevel. He called that tshuva hevel. And he says, let me just clarify. When I say that it is hevel, when I say that it's nothingness, because you have all of these other Rishonim and Achronim who go against that. That's what I meant when I said that it's hevel. I'm not insulting the Stanislav Rav. You know, my Zayda. Rav Moshe is not insulting him. He's basically saying that he's a minority of a minority.
Das Yachid.
Is a das yachid, and you don't take him into considerations. That's really what he says in the next paragraph. And there's also another Acharon that writes on a commentary on the Turei Even, because the Turei Even also is Mako like Rav Moshe. And this other opinion, this is all in the next paragraph, where he says, what did this person write? He said, so what are you going to say? That the mamzerus is a product of hanoas bia. So if a person doesn't have hanoas bia, there's no mamzerus. So Rav Moshe says that phrasing of that question is nonsense. It's got nothing to do with hanoas bia. It's got to do with the act of bia. The act of intercourse itself is what produces mamzerus. Period. And any kind of inference that you would want to make from any other source, we're not going to deal with it. Simply not going to deal with it. So I've just spoken that out ba'al peh. Let's go to the next paragraph. V'nisher ma sheyesh le'esor mitzad gezeira shema yisa achosa me'avid. So Rav Moshe already addressed that issue. What about lichatchila? We shouldn't allow it because maybe the sperm donor will have a daughter from another wife, and the guy that's born will end up marrying his half sister. So remember, he addressed that previously in the previous tshuva, and he said it's not a problem because if it's going to be from a Gentile donor, you have nothing to worry about. Now, go to the next paragraph. V'nishar. V'nishar, he says, Rak ma sheyesh lachush l'shem yamus baila v'titzarech chalitza v'yachshavu shehavladhu mi baila v'yifteru alinase l'shuk below chalitza. Listen to this. This was another objection that was lodged against Rav Moshe. By the way, Laser, you can see all of these objections that Rav Moshe is responding to. These were part of the tainas of the Satmar Rav. So what was another taina? The taina was that, if you allow a woman to be artificially inseminated and her husband wasn't capable of having children, you know what could happen possibly? The husband will die. And really, she has to do yibum or chalitza with the brother-in-law because the husband died without children. But people will think, what do you mean? Husband didn't die without children. Look, we were at the bris. This is their kid. So what's the issue? She doesn't need chalitza, and we're going to let her remarry without getting chalitza. And that's why you shouldn't allow artificial insemination. That's another argument, right? So Rav Moshe, we'll just speak it out. Rav Moshe says, what are you talking about? Come on. According to that argument, we should never allow a couple to adopt children. Because maybe, how often is it that no one knows? A couple moves to a new community, they have a child with them, it's their child. This is our son, this is our little daughter. Now, of course, if he looks Asian, right? You know what's going on. But if the child is the same racial ethnicity as the parents, why would you assume that this child is anything but the birth child of both parents? So what are you going to say? Parents can't adopt a child out of a concern that when the husband dies, they're not going to require the woman to get chalitza? Come on, we don't do that. We're not choshesh for that. And also, what happens if a man who's a bacher marries a woman with young children, and he adopts the children, he raises the children. What are you going to tell me, that a man can't marry a woman with small children? That's an almana? Because lest people think that he's the birth father, so that when he dies, they're not going to require her to get chalitza? No, we're not choshesh for those things. This is not a reasonable chashash. Right? Yes?
Would it be the same kind of argument where the father's a kohen and his son doesn't do it?
Well, in that situation, what would be the concern?
That people would say, how come your son's not duchening and you are?
So he would answer, because he was born through artificial insemination. I mean, he could tell them that. But Rav Moshe is saying the opposite concern. The concern is that people will think it's the father, and therefore when he dies without children, they'll think that he had children, and the wife won't need to have chalitza. That's his concern. But Rav Moshe says clearly we're not choshesh, that we do allow people to adopt children and treat them, and as far as the external appearance of the community, this is our birth child for all apparent purposes. We don't have to put up a sign, in shul, letting people know that we're not the birth parents. You don't have to do that. So if God forbid the husband dies and she needs chalitza, so fine. She'll let the Rav know, and she'll get a chalitza.
Does she do yibum if she's incapable of having children in a normal fashion?
Does who do yibum?
The wife of the widow.
Why would she have to do yibum? First of all, we don't allow yibum bisman hazeh. I'm saying, but why would she need to do yibum more than chalitza?
But even chalitza.
Chalitza she has to do to be
Right.
mekayim shem achiv.
But if she can't have children, in any
She's not the one who
fashion,
can't have children. The husband couldn't have
You
children.
just have but that's a particular situation.
But that's
happens in
what we're
those-
dealing with now. She's
What about-
capable. We're talking about artificial insemination of a woman who's fertile, and her husband can't have the children. That's our whole shaila.
So we're saying
So-
she'll need chalitza.
She'll need
She'll
chalitza.
need chalitza, rightfully so, but because they have children, they won't give her chalitza. So she won't step up to the plate and say,
She wants to. But if that's your concern, then we
"Yeah,
should.
you have that
Then,
with adopted children.
we have that with adopted children too. And Rav Moshe says, so you see, we're not choshesh for these things. And then he says something, which we're running over time. He says, Vihine, let's skip to the next paragraph. Af shebitshuvasi sham nistapakti mitchila im havlatia ba'as shema asura lekahuna. Now here's an interesting added kula that Rav Moshe brings to the table. He says, a woman is artificially inseminated, she gives birth to a daughter. Normally the halacha is a Jewish girl whose father is a Gentile is not allowed to marry a Kohen. We mentioned that briefly last week, right? So Rav Moshe's huge chiddush over here is that if the mother was artificially inseminated by a goy and her biological father is a Gentile, she is allowed to marry a Kohen. Why? What's the reason? So he says, Niralani as daiti borur kidekasafti sham besof shenir shekivan shehu below bia muteres gam lakuna lekuli alma. Why? Because the conception did not happen through a sexual act with a Gentile, but rather through artificial insemination. Daha tam ha'osum lekahuna vlad bas yisrael me'akum hu mishum ha'de'isa biyavamos dekulu amaroi demachshri modu sholech pagum lekahuna mikal v'chomer me'almana lekohen gadol. Mishum deleka lemifrach ma'alaman lekohen gadol shkein hi atzma mischalelas achana mikiven shniva lapasla. V'im kein babati shlo nifsla leka ha'kal v'chomer v'lechen yesh lachshir gam lekahuna. In short, the whole reason why we passel the daughter to the kahuna is because the mother has defiled herself by letting herself be bedded by a Gentile. But in this situation, she hasn't defiled herself. And since she hasn't defiled herself in any way, there's no argument to be made why the daughter should be contaminated or precluded from a Kohen.
Ben Sira was a Kohen.
Well, first of all, Yirmiyahu was a Kohen. Yirmiyahu Hanavi was a Kohen. So it stands to reason that Ben Sira was also a Kohen. Very good point. I didn't even think of that. Okay. V'hinei borush, last paragraph, last two little paragraphs. V'hinei borush shekiven sheinu misyaches achar ha'av havlad holech achar ha'em b'zer shel nachri ve'ein lo av klal lesa bazeh ha'chisaron dein ashchina shora el alavadoyim v'alfinu mikrod l'zarcha acharecha. This last paragraph says there's also no stigma of not knowing who the father is, because that's only when you don't know which Jewish father is the real father. But if it's a Gentile father, we don't have that stigma. Okay? So you don't have to worry about ambiguous parentage in this case. And finally, he says, "V'hinei yira kvod toraso shekol devarai tzod kimunuchanim umyusham." Let's look at the last two lines. He says, "You, my respected and honored opponent, will see that all that I have written is correct and proper, and umiyushavim al pi haTorah uklape shemaya v'taras ukdushas Yisrael." Everything is holy, everything is pure, everything is proper. V'chol hara'a shehir ish kvod tarasa nistalek. And all of the noise that you raised against me has been successfully refuted. Ach im kol zeh ani omer lo yishar koyach al michtavo kiven shahisa kavanasa l'shem shamayim. But I still say to you a big yishar koach. I appreciate the letter.
You think you're being sarcastic?
What? No, he's a gentleman. He's a mensch. He's great, truly humble, and truly a gadol b'Yisrael. Can you imagine people speaking this way? What a mensch. Yedido Moshe Feinstein. What a beautiful tshuva. This is one for the record books. And as I mentioned to you last time, there were those who opposed Rav Moshe, but the accepted psak by all of the poskim, both in North America and in Eretz Yisrael, that the Vlad is not a mamzer, right? And without even question, like not even a safek. And furthermore, in many instances, most poskim rely on Rav Moshe's heter, that if a couple is truly childless, and we can verify that it's because of the father, there's nothing wrong with a woman becoming artificially inseminated from a donor pool. But you do have the issue in Eretz Yisrael, a more serious issue, which is, if the sperm bank is Jewish, a Jewish sperm bank, that creates more problems.